So the air over the subcontinent has felt particularly charged lately, hasn't it?
It really has.
Following that, well, deeply unfortunate attack in Pahalgam, India took some strategic steps.
Right.
And as you'd expect, that drew a response from across the border. What really caught our eye, and probably yours too, was this rather, let's say, assertive claim by Pakistan.
About their F-16s.
Exactly. That their F-16 Fighting Falcons had, well, seen off Indian Rafales. Some reports even suggested a downing.
Yeah, I saw those. Now, the fact-checkers pretty quickly debunked that narrative, of course.
They did. But it still brings up a really crucial question, doesn't it? When you look past the claims, what are the actual capabilities? What's the real story behind these two jets?
But the F-16, an American workhorse, nearly 4 decades old.
Versus the Rafale, a much newer European fighter, technologically quite advanced.
Precisely. And that's really the core of what we want to unpack today. We've gone through our sources to try and understand the strengths, the weaknesses of both platforms, especially in the context of India and Pakistan.
And what makes it interesting, like you said, is that they haven't really clashed directly in combat outside of drills.
Right. Not F-16 against Rafale in a real shooting war. That hasn't happened. Makes understanding the baseline capabilities even more critical.
Absolutely. But look, we should say this up front. Just comparing them head to head, it's a bit misleading, isn't it?
It really is. You're talking about different generations of fighter tech.
Yeah. So suggesting they're on a completely level playing field, that doesn't quite capture the reality our sources describe.
Agreed. So let's start with the F-16. Let's get a clearer picture of its history with the Pakistan Air Force, the PAF.
Okay, sounds good. So Pakistan first got their hands on the F-16 way back in 1981, part of the U.S. Peacekeeping program.
And at that time, it was genuinely cutting edge, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Fly-by-wire controls, which was a huge deal then. Basically, electronic signals, not mechanical linkages, controlling the plane.
Give it incredible maneuverability.
Yep. Plus, Mach 2 speed could carry a decent weapons load. For the early 80s, it was top-tier stuff.
And it really transformed Pakistan's air capabilities back then, had a combat radius around 350 miles, roughly.
But the earliest ones, they had limitations.
They did. Initially, no beyond visual range missiles, BVR as we call them, that came later.
So the first deliveries, 28 F-16As, 12 F-16Bs, that's between 82 and 86.
Correct. And they went to key squadrons, numbers 9, 11, 14, mainly along the Afghan border initially.
And weapon-wise, they started with Sidewinders, AM-9Ls and P-4s.
That's right. The AM-9L was significant because it had all-aspect capability, meaning it could lock onto a target from any angle, not just from behind chasing the heat signature.
A big step up. And they had better electronic countermeasures, ECM, than other PAF jets at the time.
They did, gave them an edge in electronic warfare back then. But then things changed in the 90s.
The U.S. arms embargo. Because of Pakistan's nuclear program.
Exactly. That really put the brakes on things, stopped further F-16 deliveries, and crucially, cut off the supply of spare parts.
Which must have made maintenance and just keeping the fleet flying really difficult.
Undoubtedly. And that constraint was likely felt pretty keenly during the 1999 Kargil conflict.
Right, because during Kargil, the Indian Air Force, the IAF, was flying its MiG-29s, MiG-21s. Soviet-era designs, but still effective.
Very effective in that context. We found comments from retired IAF Air Marshal Anil Khosla, who pointed out that the MiG-29s and MiG-21s were key in establishing local air superiority.
Meaning they kept the PAF aircraft, including the F-16s, from interfering much with Indian operations.
Pretty much. He mentioned IAF fighters actively deterring PAF F-16s near the line of control, basically keeping them at bay with constant patrols.
Interesting. And that experience, according to the sources, might have pushed Pakistan harder towards developing the JF-17 Thunder with China.
It seems that way, yeah. It highlighted the need for a reliable, modern fighter they could sustain independently, or at least with Chinese help.
Okay, so the JF-17 became a bigger focus. But Pakistan did eventually add more F-16s, didn't they? From Jordan.
They did in 2013. Picked up 9 F-16As and 4 F-16Bs. Used aircraft, but helped bolster the numbers.
So current strength, around 66 of the older AB models and about 19 of the more modern CD models.
That's about right. Spread across 4 active squadrons, you've got the Griffins in Sargodha, Sherdils in Thada, Arrows and Falcons both at Shabazz.
And only one of those, the Falcons, has the newer F-16 CDs.
Correct. No, 5 Squadron operates the CD block, but you still have this underlying issue. Those older F-16 AB airframes, they're getting old. approaching obsolescence, really.
Which naturally leads to upgrades, midlife upgrades, or MLUs.
Essential if you want to keep older jets relevant.
Yeah.
Pakistan clearly saw the need. They contracted Turkish aerospace industry, TAI, back in 2009.
To upgrade quite a few, right? 41 of the older Block 15 ABs.
Yeah, it was a significant program, and these weren't just cosmetic changes. They got a much better radar, the ANAPG-68V9, a modernized cockpit, the Joint Helmet-Mounted Cueing System, JHMCS, which is a big deal, lets pilots aim just by looking.
Hey.
Plus, new electronic warfare systems, ECM suite, and crucially, structural work to extend their lifespan to 8,000 flight hours. That was finished around September 2014.
And there were follow-on contracts, too, with Turkey again and U.S. support.
Yes, another deal with Turkey in 2016, specifically for optimizing nighttime operations. And more recently, the Trump administration approved a pretty large sustainment package, around $397 million, I believe.
So clear effort to keep them flying and somewhat capable. But you mentioned structural fatigue earlier. That remains a concern with these older airframes, even after upgrades.
It has to be. You can reinforce things, but metal fatigue is cumulative. The basic structure is still decades old. That's just physics, really.
So limitations remain. Now, how have the PAF typically used these F-16s? What's their main role been?
Primarily defensive, based on your reading. Focus on intercepting threats, counter-air roles. Playing to the F-16's strengths, its agility, its speed.
Right, so training probably emphasizes close-in combat, dogfighting, high-G maneuvers.
That seems likely. It's a potential way to negate an adversary's advantage in beyond visual range missiles. If you can force the fight close, the F-16's maneuverability might just win the day.
Get inside the enemy's BVR envelope, so to speak.
Exactly. That's the theory, anyway.
Okay, that gives us a pretty solid grounding on the F-16 side of the equation. Its history, upgrades, role. Now let's switch gears to the Rafale. The IAF's gust of wind, as one source called it.
A very different beast.
Before the Rafale arrived, Pakistan's F-16s with their AMRAAM missiles actually held a BVR advantage for a while, didn't they?
They did, for a period. The early AIM-120AB's AMRAAMs had a range of, say, up to 75 kilometers.
Okay.
Then later, around 2010, Pakistan acquired the AIM-120C5 variant, which pushed that range out to about 100 kilometers.
So for a time, they could potentially engage Indian jets from further away.
Correct. That gave their F-16s a distinct edge in beyond visual range scenarios. But then, the Rafale arrived in India, armed with the Meteor missile.
And the Meteor seems to be the absolute game changer in this whole comparison. One source literally calls the Rafale the deadliest flying beast in South Asia because of it. What's so special about the Meteor?
Well, several things. First, its range is significantly longer, quoted around 120 kilometers or more. But the really critical part is its extremely large no escape zone.
No escape zone. Explain that a bit.
Think of it as a volume of space around the missile late in its flight. Once an enemy aircraft enters that zone, the missile has so much remaining energy and maneuverability that escape becomes virtually impossible, no matter how hard the target tries to evade.
Wow. So it's not just about raw range, but the lethality at range.
Precisely. It effectively neutralizes the advantage the AMRAAM C5 offered, not just against older jets, but even against things like the PAF's JF-17s.
So put simply, Indian Rafale pilots can likely detect and fire on an F-16 well before the F-16 pilot even knows they're being targeted.
That's the potential tactical reality, yes. A huge first-shot advantage. And that's amplified by the Rafale's radar. It uses an AESA radar active electronically scanned array.
Okay, what's the advantage there?
Unlike older mechanically scanned radars that physically move a dish, an AESO uses thousands of tiny transmit-receive modules. They can steer beams electronically almost instantly, so it can track many targets simultaneously, resist jamming better, and provide much clearer target data. It's like having thousands of tiny radars working together.
So the missile and the radar work hand in glove for that BVR dominance. What else gives the Rafale an edge?
Quite a few things, actually. It has an advanced towed decoy system, the X-Guard. It's a fiber optic decoy reeled out behind the aircraft to lure missiles away, both air-to-air and surface-to-air.
Okay, defensive tech. What about offense besides Meteor?
The Scalp Cruise missile. It's an air-launched missile designed for striking high-value, fixed targets deep inside enemy territory. Think radar sites, air bases, command centers. It flies low, has long range, and is hard to detect.
A serious standoff strike capability.
Definitely. And then you have the Hammer smart weapons. These are all-weather, precision-guided munitions, range around 70 kilometer, fire and forget, resistant to jamming, and can even work without GPS if needed. Very flexible.
That's a formidable toolkit. Now, What about maneuverability? We talked about the F-16 being famous for agility. How does the Rafale stack up in a dogfight?
That's a good question. The F-16, being lighter, might have a slight edge in instantaneous turn rate, like in a very quick close-in maneuver.
Okay.
But the Rafale has an incredibly sophisticated fly-by-wire system and just excellent overall aerodynamics. It can sustain high G-forces and maintain maneuverability throughout a prolonged engagement. So while the F-16 might be nimble, the Rafale can likely counter that effectively in anything more than a brief knife fight.
So maybe a slight edge to the F-16 in the first turn, but Rafale potentially better in a sustained turning fight.
That's a reasonable way to think about it, yeah. But then you add in the electronic warfare factor.
Right. And here it sounds like the Rafale is way ahead.
Oh, significantly. The Rafale's Spectra system. It's considered one of the best integrated electronic warfare suites in the world.
What does it do?
It detects threats radars, missiles from very long ranges, like maybe 40 targets out to 90 miles or so. But crucially, it doesn't just detect. It can actively jam enemy radar and even spoof it, make it see false targets or misinterpret data.
Making it incredibly hard for, say, an F-16's radar to get a clean lock on the Rafale.
Exactly. It significantly degrades the enemy's ability to target the Rafale. Combine that with the accuracy of its own AESA radar for detecting threats. The Rafale pilot has much better situational awareness and survivability.
And the F-16, even the upgraded ones, they don't really have anything comparable to Spectra.
Not in the same league, no. Their upgraded EW suites are better than what they started with, but Spectra is a generation ahead. It makes the F-16 more vulnerable in a complex electronic environment.
Okay. What about range and endurance? You mentioned the F-16 might have a slightly longer range on paper.
Marginally, perhaps, depending on the specific variant and mission profile, but what's really telling is how the IAF has demonstrated the Rafale's endurance.
Like those ferry flights from France.
Exactly. Non-stop flights, almost 9 hours long, with multiple aerial refuelings. That shows serious legs.
And exercises too, like Gig and Shakti.
Right. That was back in 2018, even before the Rafales arrived. But IAF aircraft, likely Su-30s, which are also long-range jets, were flying missions lasting 8 to 10 hours. It demonstrates the capability and intent to operate over vast distances.
Meaning they could potentially launch strikes against Pakistan from bases deep within India, coming from unexpected directions.
That's the strategic implication, yes. Range and endurance provide flexibility and unpredictability.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. When you weigh everything, the BVR capabilities, the EW suites, the weapons, the picture seems pretty clear.
It does lean heavily towards the Rafale in most key areas of modern air combat.
The dominance and beyond visual range combat with Meteor seems to really negate Pakistan's previous AMRAAM advantage, and maybe even their ability to effectively retaliate at range.
That's a major factor. While the F-16 is still respected in a dogfight,
Getting into that dogfight against a Rafale with its superior sensors and EW is the big hurdle for the F-16 pilot.
precisely, the Rafale's electronic warfare and its sort of frontal stealth characteristics give it a decisive edge in preventing that close-in engagement from happening on equal terms.
And then you have to factor in the rest of the IAF's assets, right?
Yeah.
Like the Su-30 MKIs flying alongside the AWAY ACS, providing early warning and control.
Exactly. Those are force multipliers. They further tilt the balance in favor of the side operating the Rafales. The whole network enhances the platform's effectiveness.
So the main takeaway here, it really feels like while the F-16 was, and maybe still is in some ways, a capable fighter, especially after upgrades, the Rafale just represents a significant leap forward, a generational jump in technology.
I think that's fair to say, particularly in the context of modern network-centric warfare, BVR combat, and electronic warfare, which are increasingly defining air superiority. The F-16 was formidable in its day, but the Rafale is built for today's and tomorrow's challenges.
And this whole analysis, triggered by those recent claims, it really highlights not just how these specific machines compare, but how the entire landscape of air power and the strategic military balance in the region is constantly evolving.
It certainly does. It's a dynamic picture.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you, the listener, to chew on. We've talked about the F-16 and the Rafale, but given how fast military tech moves, what's next? What kind of future capabilities might completely rewrite the rules of aerial dominance, perhaps making even today's most advanced fighters seem, well, almost quaint?